Hey everyone, and welcome as we continue our study through the Gospels, looking at the 250 events in the life of Jesus. We're doing this chronologically, and today we're looking at the disciples. The disciples are forbidding another people or group of people to use Jesus's name, and so it's an interesting story that we see here. Yesterday we saw where the disciples were arguing about who's going to be the greatest, and so this kind of plays into this a little bit as we go into this. And so I'm going to mainly stick out of Mark 9:38 through 41 here, because Luke 9 basically says the same thing Mark does, but in a little bit shorter version. And so in verse 38 in Mark 9, we see that Jesus, or John, said to Jesus, "Teacher, we saw someone using your name to cast out demons, but we told him to stop because he wasn't in our group." And Jesus, looking at it, he's like, Jesus says to him, "Don't stop him." Jesus said, "No one who performs a miracle in my name will soon be able to speak evil of me. Anyone who is not against us is for us. If anyone gives you even a cup of water because you belong to Messiah, I tell you the truth, that person will surely be rewarded." And so we have here, and an interesting thing I want you to see here. One, John didn't record this. Sorry, and something you'll notice about John, John doesn't record a lot of the negative things about him. We're going to see that in a next week too. But he does like to record a lot of, or write a lot of the positive things about him, especially how good of a runner he is. So we'll see that. But it's interesting, that we see this aspect from John, and we're going to see another aspect from John. He's known as the apostle of love, right? Because he writes about loving people and not being jealous of people. But early on, we see a side of him that was not that way. So it's neat to see, I love to see the change that happens with John here as he becomes an apostle and he grows in Christ. And so they see them doing this. And so Jesus here wasn't saying that being indifferent or neutral toward him is good as being committed. And there's a difference here. And as he explains in Matthew 12:30, right? Anyone who isn't with me opposes me, and anyone who isn't working with me is actually working against me. But if we can see here, right? These people weren't working against. They were using Jesus's name. They believed in Jesus. They were using his name to do so. So in both cases, Jesus was pointing out that neutrality toward him is not possible. You can't be neutral toward Jesus, and that's what he says. And it's just like, look, if they're casting out demons in my name, they're not going to be able to say. They're not going to talk negatively against me. And so the thing that we have to remember here is that his followers will not all resemble each other or belong to the same groups, and we've got to get that mindset away. We've kind of had this mindset for some reason, that everyone in the church has to think the same, be the same, look the same, have the same politics, have all the, like it's like we're a bunch of just clones running around, right? And that's the furthest from the truth. If you look at the 12 apostles, I mean, that was you had a zealot, you had a tax collector, you had, I mean, just all these different fishermen, different people, from different walks of life, different groups, and then later on you throw Paul in there, who was a Pharisee, and so the wonderful thing about Christianity, especially once we see Christianity happen, I mean, we see all these people coming to church. You had the rich, you had the poor, you had slaves or servants and their masters, right, side by side, and so it was a wonderful thing, and they didn't all come together and like, oh, we all have to think the same, we all have to believe the same, we all have to look the same, we all have to, it wasn't that, and so there was diversity, and it was wonderful to see, and so we need to make sure we don't get caught up in this being an echo chamber and being a bubble of every single church that you see should, the church building should look exactly the same, all the people should look and be dressed exactly the same, and they should all be preaching and teaching exactly the same thing word for word. I mean, that's not good. That's honestly, I'll say that this, and I mean this politely, but that's almost cult like, right? And so there's got to be diversity, there's got to be different forms of thoughts, and there's got to be different teaching. Now, we're not saying that we should promote sin or anything like that. We're not talking about anything like that. But if you can't be in a group of people who can't disagree and have different beliefs, then that shows more about you than it does them. And so we need to encourage in our churches the room for questions and doubt, and being able to have conversation around things and not agree on them. That's one of the things we try to do so much is, if there's things that and I've said this a lot, I think before, but kind of our motto is if God's not going to ask about us on Judgment Day, then we're not going to fight about it. We're not going to argue about it. It's okay to have different beliefs around such stuff. So it's that kind of stuff. And so, people who are on Jesus' side, right, have the same goal. Their goal is to build up the kingdom. We may do it differently, but as long as we're trying to bring people to Christ, they should not let their differences interfere with this goal, right? Because I have different beliefs than the church down the street or the denomination down the street, right? We're all, some of us claim to be non-denominational, some of us are, right? But some a lot of us not aren't, and we all have our things that we disagree on, but the ultimate goal is everyone's trying to get everyone to heaven, and we just have different beliefs. And again, right, I'm not talking about people like organizations that promote sin or say sin's okay. All right, that's where we cross the line. But just because we have different of agreement around maybe communion or the way we worship or who can preach and who can teach and those kind of things. Again, I'm pretty. There's a lot of things that I think Jesus is going to ask us about. I mean, he's told us what he's going to ask us about on Judgment Day. That kind of stuff's not it. He's not going to be like, well, how many times did you take communion? Or how many times were you in the church building? He's going to ask you how you treated other people. I mean, and that's simple as that. I mean, and so we need to get, we need to learn that, it's okay for us to be different and just be okay with that. Learn to be okay with that, right? We don't have to agree with everything. And so, anyways, I get back to this, right? And what I mean by this is those who share a common faith, right? They should cooperate. If we have it, we believe in the same God, we believe in the same Jesus, right? We believe that he was crucified, that he rose on the third day, right? We believe, we follow all the things that we believe. It takes faith, right? We're saved by faith. We're commanded to be baptized. We're commanded to take communion. We're commanded to worship him. Basically, it's a pretty simple list of commands that, and so some of us carry them out differently. And so, we need to I say this: we need to focus on ourselves and not focus on the people down the street, and worry about what we're doing to try to bring people to Christ, and then work with others. I think that's been one of the most harming things to the church is that we kind of have this same attitude as the disciples. Like, oh, them people down there are using your name, and they're not you. We don't think they're using it correctly. Okay. In the end, I would say 95% of the stuff that we have disagreements on, not going to matter. No, actually, it's probably 99%. And so we see all this, right? And and people don't have to just be like us to follow Jesus with us. And we've got to learn that that's not everyone has to believe the same way. You should be allowed to question the beliefs. You should be allowed to not believe the same thing as the people you're in the room with, and that be okay. And so we need to make sure that and so what it boils down to here is the disciples were jealous. And I think that's part of it. I've seen that, right? I've seen smaller churches look at the bigger churches and be like, oh well, they must be doing something wrong to be that big, right? Or to be growing like that. And that's a jealous attitude, right? Just because you don't agree with some of the things they do doesn't mean that they're sinning to grow their church and stuff like that. So we don't need to have this same attitude that the apostles has. And we go back, right? We go back to Luke 9, which we've already studied, and nine of them, right, together, nine of them were unable to cast out a single evil spirit. And so this is where this jealousy is coming from. Some guy that's not even an apostle, right? That's just he's using Jesus's name, and so they see this a man who is not one of their group. He's casting out demons, and so they told him to stop. Right? It's making them look bad. Hey, nine of us together couldn't do it, but this one guy over here is doing it just by using the name of Jesus. And so a lot of times that's human nature, right? We get jealous. We get jealous of the church down the street. We get jealous of those who may be converting more people than us. And so we need to make sure we don't. We're working for God. We're all in this together, and we need to put that our differences aside and stop being jealous of one another and be proud and be glad for those things. And so we need, right, our what happens, right? Our pride is hurt when someone succeeds and we failed, right? Or we feel like we failed, right? I always say this, if you're growing the kingdom of God, then you're not failing. And so just because maybe someone's growing it faster than you are or has brought more people to, doesn't mean you're fair. It just means maybe God's called you to serve a certain amount of people. Yeah, maybe that's it. And so, or maybe God's called you to have a different type of service. And so we just need to, we need to focus on our job and not focus on the people, down the road or down the street or maybe sometimes even next to us or in the same room as us, and be jealous of those people. Jesus is saying here, there's no room for jealousy in this or in the spiritual warfare of his kingdom, right? There's no room for this, right? We shouldn't be jealous of the same people, working. And if you're in a battlefield, you don't see two, you don't see two different units fighting for the same side, arguing about each other's tactics and telling them they're doing it wrong on the battlefield. It would be a disaster. And unfortunately, sometimes we see that. And so we need to make sure that we're careful with that, right? Share Jesus, open, his open arms attitude. He has an open arms attitude toward Christian workers outside your group. We should be proud. If we see someone who's converting people, it's like, man, that's awesome. I'm glad they are converting people to Christ, right? I may not agree with everything they do, but that's okay. That's differences of opinion. They're still bringing people to Christ and they're still following Christ. And so we need to rejoice when they're able to bring people to Christ and not be jealous of those. And so, especially in today's world, right? For Christianity, it needs to have a unified front. We need to show a unified front of working towards bringing people to Christ and not showing jealousy and argument and having our lessons about the people down the road about how well they're doing this wrong and they're doing this wrong. That's not going to do you any good. All that does is basically isolate you and put you in more of a bubble, and you become just a bubble that's an echo chamber of look how we're awesome, we're good, we're the only ones who are right, and everyone else is wrong. Well, you can't do that, man. If you get caught up in that, that's not what Christianity is about. You look at all the different churches, right? You look at all the different letters that Paul wrote, right? And to all the different churches. They all were unique. They all had their different worship styles. They all had their different cultural customs. They all had that. And we're going to have that in the church today, right? I mean, even we should have that in America, but we're especially going to have it overseas. I mean, you think about the church over in China, and you think about the church over in Africa, and even over in Europe. They're all going to look a little different, and they're going to do things different, and it may be different than what we are traditions, right? The most of it's traditions, right? And that we get caught up in. And so, again, like I said, I'm not talking about sinful practices. When we see churches accepting sin as okay, we have to say that's not good, right? We have to call that out, or maybe not publicly point out, but in a sense we have to say, okay, this is not right. What this church is doing here is not okay, right? I mean, we have to do that. That's a biblical command. But when it comes to differences of opinion and differences in traditions and things like that, we need to let it go and just be happy for everyone. And so that's the lesson we see with this. We see that Jesus' disciples were jealous of someone who was able to do something that they struggled with. And so instead of encouraging him and saying, hey, why don't you come learn from the man that you're actually, the name of the man that you're using, they told him to stop and be quiet and stop doing it. And that's not the right thing. And we should never discourage anyone from trying to bring people to Christ. As always, I appreciate everyone who watches these. If you feel like you're learning something from them, please share with someone that you know. As always, also, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, please do that. And we'll keep producing these videos and going deeper into other subjects as we get done going through the Gospels here. But as always, I appreciate everyone for watching.